Our guest tonight is Charles Goyette, the author of Empire of Lies. The Bruce Collins Show is always on your side, like appendicitis.
Flip on the switch, feel the static clear, naming the glow, yeah, the reason we're here. From the edge of the map to your kitchen chair, he's talking wild truth like he owns the air. Out past the highway, out past the mall, where the sand keeps secrets, you can hear that call. It's the Bruce Collins Show. The buried up broadcasting, taking control from the desert wind to your radio. We're the loyal knights of the wobbly table, laughing loud, keeping legends stable. Yeah, the Bruce Collins Show. Funeral rides high over dust and stone, stories like sparks in a cyclone. Strange little kingdom made of coffee and chords, where the late night callers become the lords. Crowns made of stickers, capes made of flannel. We pledge our oaths to the glowing panel. It's the Bruce Collins Show. The buried up broadcasting, stealing the glow from the desert wind to your radio. We're the loyal knights of the wobbly table, raising mugs, making myths and fables. Yeah, the Bruce Collins Show.
Welcome to the Bruce Collins Show. I'm Bruce Collins, the Baron of Broadcasting. My co-host is Chad the Odometer Miles. Our guest tonight is best-selling author Charles Goyette. His most recent book is Empire of Lies. If you want to join the Bruce Collins Show community, you're free to join our page on Facebook. And also, we always appreciate it when you like our videos and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. I also have another YouTube channel called Bruce Collins Reacts and Stuff that you may also enjoy. And now on with the show. Allow me to introduce my co-host, Chad Miles, and also Christopher Cartwright. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hey, Bruce.
How are you?
I'm doing well. And I'm also working on a new book. It's an investigation into why self-checkout machines at the grocery store always require assistance.
That sounds interesting.
Guys, remember the show's producer who went missing last week?
That's an odd statement to make, Christopher. I have no idea what you're talking about. Have you heard of this, Chad?
Sounds like a conspiracy theory.
Remember the room he went into and never came back out?
Sure, if you say so.
I actually opened the door and looked inside.
Oh, really? What did you see?
It was a women's restroom.
Okay, thanks. Not sure why we had to share that on the radio show.
Yeah, that's unprofessional.
Speaking of unprofessional, Chad, did you send an email that went to the general manager that I should be fired?
Ooh, now things are getting good.
That email was meant for the general manager.
Yeah, but you sent it as a reply to all, which means I got it, Earl the janitor with the large hangnail got it, Sally the cafeteria helper with the smelly hairnet got it, even the shifty-looking guy who parks my car was smirking.
I'll send another email saying April Fools.
In mid-April?
I guess it's true what they say.
What is that?
Better late than never.
I like your attitude, Christopher. It's way better than Bruce's.
My attitude is appropriate.
You need some medicine, Bruce?
Oh, like what? Like an aspirin?
Nah, you need a dose of the Chad Miles Report.
With the dumbest news of the week.
Coffee stain on his collar, name tag hanging wrong, sleep in both of his eyes, red light flashing strong. He shuffles up to the camera, cracked mug, crooked tie, says, I've seen some stupid stories,
Okay, you heard the music. So now it's time for the Chad Miles Report with the dumbest news of the week. Take it away, Chad.
Article number 1. There are sports fans, and there are sports fans. Andy Milne, a 62-year-old retired teacher, is set to follow the 2026 World Cup around North America, the Associated Press reported on March 27th, just as soon as he sells his second home to do so. Milne currently lives in Thailand and rents out a home in northern England, which he plans to put on the market for the equivalent of $465,000 to fund his World Cup dreams. I definitely want to see the whole tournament. I'm going to the U.S. on June 3rd and will be there for 7 weeks, he said, so it will cost quite a lot of money. That's from the AP Associated Press.
That's ridiculous. In other news, there's a whole section on Indeed.com where Walmart is hiring old people who blew all their money on stupid stuff.
Well, Andy, they might have a job for you.
Yeah.
When you spend your $465,000 to watch soccer.
Yeah, and like
gosh.
those soccer players care a thing about him.
Right.
They're not going to bail you out after you spend all your money.
Oh, boy. Couldn't he just wait till it was closer to where he lived?
Doesn't he have a television
Right.
like the rest of us?
I think you could stream it online somewhere.
Yeah.
Andy, that's free advice. Article number 2. KABC TV reported on April the 6th that a man at an Orange County, California gas station sat in his car and refused to leave until he was given $55 in gas. When Irvine Police Department officers arrived, he told them, "I sincerely believe that money as a unit of payment is not real."
Oh, no.
Police tried to reason with him, but eventually he was placed in handcuffs and taken away. That's from KABC.
They almost made a trade, gas for lead. I mean, I guess on the bright side now he gets free gas and now free meals.
Yep.
Hey, he's kind of right, though. Money's not real, is it? I mean, seriously.
Well, then I guess the gas wasn't real either.
Well, the gas is very real. And you're right, the bullets would have been very real also. Article number 3. On March 31st at Tokyo's Disney Sea amusement park, Rapunzel's forest took on the look of Hitchcock's The Birds, the New York Post reported. As an animatronic Rapunzel leaned out of her tower window, singing merrily, 2 black ravens started pecking at her head and ripping out strands of hair. Of course, being animatronic, Rapunzel had no idea about the birds ravaging her signature feature, and she continued singing and smiling to onlookers. What a horrific sight that must have been.
As her eyeball popped out.
Children crying. Ah!
Yeah.
One commenter said, "I thought the birds were animatronic too." I thought it was part of the show.
Yeah.
Rapunzel was removed from her perch temporarily for repairs. That's really weird. There's got to be a video of that.
There is. I saw it. It was funny.
Oh, okay.
It was really funny.
Awesome.
Did they do pretty good damage to Rapunzel?
Yeah, she looked wrecked a little bit.
Yeah. Can you imagine? That was Tokyo. Can you imagine if Godzilla had shown up in Tokyo at that moment? They wouldn't have believed it. It's an animatronic.
That was part of the show. Article number 4. Who knew? In Kentucky and probably elsewhere, it is illegal to operate a non-motor vehicle while under the influence of alcohol. The Smoking Gun reported that on March 26th, a police officer in Bowling Green noticed a man atop a horse around 6 p.m. Jorge Hernandez.
Normally in the United States, that's an unusual mode of transportation nowadays, but it's Kentucky.
It's technically a self-driving car as well. You fall asleep on it, it'll take you home.
Yeah, the horse can find its way. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, the horse was sober.
Right, maybe. Jorge Hernandez, 48, was reportedly partially slumped over as his horse galloped through a neighborhood. The officer conducted a traffic stop when the duo moved onto the sidewalk. The arrest report said Hernandez smelled of alcohol and had slurred speech. A bag from the liquor store was tied to the saddle. He was taken into custody but was released to federal agents pursuant to an immigration warrant. No word on the horse's fate.
Oh my gosh.
That's from the smoking gun. I didn't know the smoking gun was still around, so I learned something today.
And next you'll tell me the hubcaps on the horse's legs were stolen.
The horse was on blocks.
I was just going to say that.
It was so crazy. Then the Ravens came in.
Yeah.
Thought it was part of the show.
The horse was released. He passed the blood alcohol test.
Don't worry, he'll find his way home. Article number 5.
His real home.
Article number 5. As if there aren't more pressing issues in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul has taken on dancing in restaurants.
Wow.
The New York Post reported, right, cracking down on the important things. The New York Post reported that Hochul's 2026 State of the State address, she promised to direct the state liquor authority to create a new hybrid restaurant tavern license. According to her policy book, under this license, bars and taverns would automatically have the right to showcase dancing, which has been prohibited under early licenses. It creates a new opportunity by cutting through red tape, said Restaurant Association CEO Melissa Fleischert. Okay, I guess that's a law from a bygone era.
So I was looking just now on New York's problems, their main problems. They have a severe housing affordability crisis, high cost of living, population outmigration, which means everybody's leaving. The state struggles with high debt burdens. In New York City alone, they have a $7 billion budget deficit, slower job growth than the national average, and disparities between downstate and upstate economies. But our governor just allowed you to dance at the bar.
Jeez.
They really needed that hybrid license system. It was important.
I can just see those campaign commercials. Governor dancing there in the bar. Look what I got you.
It says showcase dancing. Does that mean just dancing or like the employees dance? Like Coyote Ugly or something like that?
We may not want to know that. Maybe the governor will dance there.
Showcase dancing.
They got the communist in New York City, so.
You know, this was some law they passed in like the 1950s to, cut down on dance halls or get more money or something when that was in vogue. And now it's just like.
She needed a victory.
Unneeded. Yes.
She wanted a talking point for her debates upcoming.
Was there a showcase dancing lobby that came to the New York City Capitol every week?
You know what? You make up a really good point because I bet there are lobbyists that are representing the alcoholic, the bars.
I'm sure there are. Yep.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yes, sir.
Set my dancers free.
That's right. Yes. Well, Chad and Christopher, thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will talk to you real soon. Our guest up next is Charles Goyette, the author of Empire of Lies, in a moment. Our guest today is Charles Goyette. Charles Goyette is a New York Times bestselling author and award-winning talk show host. He has appeared often on national television, among them Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox Business, and PBS. Charles joined with former presidential candidate Ron Paul for the nationally syndicated commentary Ron Paul's America, that aired daily on 125 radio stations. His latest book is Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. Charles Goyette, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
So, Bruce, thank you so very much for having me on your program. I really appreciate it.
It's great to have you on. And of course, here's the book, Empire of Lies, Charles Goyette. I highly recommend it. And of course, Uncle Sam there endorsing the book. So Charles, my mother passed away about 1.5 years ago of dementia, and I had been taking care of her, and I was also working a 40-hour job, fortunately remotely. And I was living in the Bay Area, and I decided after that, my brother and I decided individually to move back to the Tucson area. I lived here during my teenage years, and I understand your family has made some contributions to Tucson. Can you tell us about that first?
Yeah, but it goes way, way back. My grandfather was the first student body president at the University of Arizona. That was when Arizona became a state. And he was a civic leader. Actually, he and the Ronstadt family, Linda's family, owned the first automobile dealership in southern Arizona way back when. He did public service work during the Great Depression for families in need, and was just a civic leader for many, many years. My parents married in Tucson. And oddly enough, someplace early in my broadcasting career, I actually ended up going to work in radio stations in Tucson. I was a morning man in Tucson and programmed a radio station in Tucson, and enjoyed it very much. And my wife lived in my now wife lived in Tucson at the same time. We didn't know each other then, but we like to go back and visit places that we both like to, familiarize ourselves with back in the olden days. So we have a lot of ties to Tucson. I'm glad you're there. I hope you like it.
I do. And so 20 years ago, I started listening to this podcast called Financial Sense with Jim Poplava. And there's a website, financialsense.com. And Jim would talk about an upcoming recession. And so that caught my ear, and I kept listening, and he would throw things in like Austrian economics. He would talk about Dr. Ron Paul, and eventually he interviewed Dr. Ron Paul. And also the value of gold and silver, things like that. And I became very interested in it. I supported Ron Paul. In fact, that's his picture right there.
Oh, my word, yes.
In 2008 and 2012, I met him. What a great guy. How were your views and opinions formed, though, about Ron Paul and sort of this non-interventionist political stance?
I had followed Ron a little bit, but I originally met him when I had him as a featured speaker as a keynote speaker at a couple of conferences I put on, one in Scottsdale, Arizona, and one in Newport Beach, California. And so he was one of the main speakers. Anthony Sutton, known to some people, Murray Rothbard, and others were speakers. I got to know him then. But the thing that really cleared everything up for me was before I met Ron Paul, when I learned about Austrian economics and the Austrian business cycle theory. And just in to describe it easily, quickly in layman's terms, it's kind of like a hangover theory. So everybody wonders, where do recessions and depressions come from? And, you watch Fed chairman in testimony, well, nobody can predict, nobody knows, and so on. Well, the Austrians solved that problem a very long time ago. The Fed creates a bunch of money, and it's like, giving a fix to a junkie, and he gets all high and hyper about it, and the economy does as well. Oh, loose money, and, builders build to the end of the earth if they have enough money available to them. People loan them money, and so we're awash in Fed money, made up, unbacked money, and at some point, the discovery sinks in, like in the mortgage meltdown in 2008, the discovery sinks in that there aren't enough people to buy all those houses, that we've created a big, massive bubble in the economy. It could be a bubble in the stock market, in the housing market, in the bond market, bubble here, bubble there. And so the solution of the state is to try to keep pumping up the bubble. It's like, when you go to the gas station as a kid to fill up the tires on your bike, and you just keep pumping and pumping, 90 pounds is good. Why not 120? And then bam, the whole thing blows up. So they keep pumping. So once I understood the Austrian business cycle theory, that these recessions aren't mysterious cosmic maladies that come from outer space, but they're the result of deliberate policy by the what I call the deep state money managers, and then we pay the consequences when their made up bubbles burst. I I was on board. I became a student of Austrian economics as a layman, and that's why I chose to champion Ron Paul, because he had the ability to explain these things to people all over the country for many, many years, and they got it. People turned out, as you will remember, people turned out even on college campuses by the thousands to chant "In the Fed" when Ron Paul came to town to speak.
Yeah.
So he had a big impact.
Even in the liberal Bay Area, we saw a Ron Paul revolution. Now, you mentioned Anthony Sutton, and he wrote a book, I believe, 50 years ago called Trilaterals Over Washington. And so you're familiar with Patrick Wood then, correct?
Yes, and one of my other friends just mentioned him to me the other day. But yes, I am familiar with him. Have you had him on your show?
Oh, many times over the
Yeah.
years.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Good.
So Charles, your book is, again, Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole. If you're watching this and not listening to it, here's a picture of the book. Can you give us a helicopter view of this book? What is the major thesis?
Yeah, the major thesis is that empires and the truth are incompatibles. You can't have a global American military empire or any other and expect the government to tell you the truth. They lie to protect their empire, and this is a function of the deep state. Just a quick detour to describe what I mean by the deep state. It's the executive arm of the global American military empire, and so. And it functions all through all kinds of petty minor bureaucrats in the government. People think that guys like CIA Director James Brennan and James Clapper and Brennan are the epitome of the deep state, but it works all the way through the government. And just to give you one example that I cite in the book is the case of a fellow by the name of, I think it's Alexander Vindman. He was just a lieutenant colonel. I don't say just a lieutenant colonel. It's a great rank for somebody, but he was on Donald Trump's National Security Council team in the first Trump administration. And he's Ukrainian by birth. His primary interest in life, he's a Ukrainian speaker, both he and his twin brother. And his primary interest in life was, arming Ukraine. The president didn't want to arm Ukraine, so Vindman went to the Congress and blew the whistle on Trump and this is his testimony in Congress, he blew the whistle on Trump because Trump isn't following the consensus of the interagencies in his policy. To me, this is a subject of great merriment and hilarity. There's no mention of the interagency in the Constitution. What is the interagency? Who gets to vote? Who profits from its decisions? How do we appeal its decisions? Can anybody join? Can we watch when they make decisions? It's just basically a description of the bureaucracy that serves, the global American military empire, the deep state. And so, I suppose it's funny, to think of people posturing as superior to the Constitution, but the Constitution is the rule book. And if you don't like it, I guess you can change it. But in the meantime, there is no interagency, and a National Security Council staffer doesn't get to make decisions on what national policy is. He can have his input. So anyway, that is sort of the backstory of the book to describe the deep state, its propensity to lie, and then the end game. And I've written the book not just to resurrect or exhume the bones of all the lies they've told us to involve us in these needless regime change wars over the years, one after the other, but to also provide a guideline for what this means for us if we don't start to value the truth. It is an old syndrome, Bruce, for empires to see the threat to their control, to their dominance, to their global hegemony, to see those threats as a military challenge. So America's prosperity drove the empire. Without American prosperity, there would have been no American empire. It's prosperity, the hard work and productivity of the people that lies in the background and makes everything else that the empire does possible. But yet, they become so accustomed to military might that the leaders of the empire of lies see any kind of challenge or loss of dominance to other countries and so on, changing times. They see this not as a threat to their productivity and their waning state of dominance, their loss of manufacturing, of so on and so forth. They see it as a military challenge. And so they react to it as a military challenge, as we are doing today. And the consequence of that is that even more money is diverted from the productive economy that makes us rich and wealthy to the military, which blows up things, and then we have to go in and rebuild them at the expense of the American taxpayers afterwards. We rebuild the schools, rebuild the roads, rebuild the hospitals all over the world, and our own infrastructure continues to die. So that is sort of the backstory. That's where I want to leave people. I want them to see the syndrome as it unfolds, so they'll be able to recognize it as it appears in the current public debate and be able to protect themselves from it or to do something about it. And that's the Empire of Lies. You know, by the way, just a quick detour, it's called Fragments from the Memory Hole, because probably everybody read or was exposed to the book 1984 by George Orwell in their high school years or whenever it may have been. In this dystopian future, 1984, it was written in 1948. The publisher didn't want the title 1948, even though Orwell said this is going on now. So they changed it to 1984. Now 1984 seems like, ancient history, but it is a novel about what happens in the future. In 1984, if they want to torture you, if the state wants to torture you, they take you to the Ministry of Love. And if they want to rewrite history, to pretend that they didn't do what they did, and make sure nobody remembers the things that they've done, they take you to the Ministry of Truth. And that's where the memory hole is. And the protagonist in the book, his job is to rewrite history so the people won't be aware of what the state has done, to rewrite history. And the old history in those days is taken out, it's printed off, and it's dropped into an incinerator called the memory hole so nobody remembers. So I'm trying to restore memory so people will know, where we are.
So most people politically after 9/11 got caught up in the whole, patriotism, let's go to Iraq and let's liberate the country. And you were outspoken, and of course this book is outspoken in your opposition to Bush's Iraqi war. What did that cost you anything at that time?
Oh, I should say. It cost me a really wonderful broadcasting career. I mean, my star was rising. I was, in demand all over the company that I worked for. I had a wonderful afternoon drive primetime slot on one of their flagship stations, and yeah, I mean, I don't think the details of it are too important to what it did to me personally in my career, but there were other things. I kept a file of death threats.
Wow.
I suppose they didn't want to talk about it, but I think my kids ran into some resistance in schools because I was notorious for, and of course, I think this encapsulates the whole thing, Bruce. Even the editorial writer in the Arizona Republic, which was a big newspaper at the time, the Arizona Republic of Phoenix Gazette, big Pulitzer, no, I beg your pardon, they were owned by Pulliam Press at the time, but they dominated the state. They really ran the state, and the publisher said, I tell Arizonans what to think. I mean, they were very full of themselves. Anyway, one of their editorial writers, with whom I guess I had an ongoing feud with the newspaper and its coverage, one of the editorial writers wrote, well, Charles Goyette is, and I can't remember now, either a terrorist lover or a Saddam lover. And I'm thinking these people are paid to make fine distinctions. When you read the editorial, you think they're going to present the argument and show you, the weight of the arguments and so on in a fair manner. But when you got an editorial writer on the state's biggest newspaper, calling you a terrorist lover or Saddam lover, it's just, all hope in the fine distinctions in the editorial process are totally out the window. So it was a pretty ugly time.
Yeah. Well, sorry that happened to you. Now, 6 months ago, I was hopeful that we would not be having a war under President Trump. What happened? It feels like his foreign policy has changed.
It sure has, and it's an amazing surprise to me that all the people that jumped on board, all the Trumpsters and so on, that were, cheered him on when he said, we were lied into Iraq. It was like the little boy called out the king for not having any clothes on. Nobody in Republican circles ever wanted to say that we were lied into war in Iraq, that it was a phony war and stuff. The facts were all known. It was all evident by then. It was, there were no WMDs. We knew the story of how they cooked up that excuse to, as a public relations gambit and stuff. But it wasn't, Ron Paul did a great job talking about it in the presidential debate, but the widespread public recognition that it was a fraud, that Bush had lied us into a phony war, really took place. I give Trump credit for it when he, someplace in one of the debates, he said, well, they lied us into war, and it was shock. Everybody's shocked. But as the moderators went around the room to talk to other debate participants, even Jeb Bush said, well, no, I guess the question was, would you have gone in knowing what we know now? And even Jeb Bush said, they can't say it straightforward. He can't say, well, no, I would have gone in. It was a huge mistake. He said, if I had known then what I know now, I wouldn't have engaged. What the heck does engaged mean? Either you would have gone to war, I wouldn't have engaged. But there are, all of this stuff went on for years. But Trump, I think, sort of broke the spell. So when he ran as no more regime change wars, MAGA, American resources, American money to make America great, the American people don't need to go die for oil plutocracies and cronies around the world, and so on. It seemed to create a groundswell. Americans really thought, why shouldn't America be for Americans? And why are we, as we refer to, building roads and paying for sex change operations for kids in Guatemala? And why are we doing all of this stuff with our money when our whole infrastructure is in decay and the American lifespan was decreasing at the time? And, So I thought, for whatever Trump's faults may have been, that at least he broke the spell about that. So I was shocked when he reversed gears on that, and I think many other things. And the shock, though, wasn't that he reversed gears. This is what politicians will do. Wet finger in the air, test the winds. But what I was shocked by was when all the MAGA people turned like on a dime to support him, and they didn't all. And I don't know what the numbers were. Maybe a third or half of them said, "Yeah, whatever he says, chest beating, chest thumping. Yeah, whatever he says. Oh yeah, we'll show him. We're the Americans. We have the might." And I was just shocked that they had turned that quickly. But I should have realized it by that point that, discernment isn't really important in the public debate. But it shocked me that it happened. And of course, the conclusion I've drawn is that he has destroyed for once and for all the MAGA coalition. He did have a coalition. It's gone forever. The people that believed him in the past are not liable to believe him again, at least the ones that feel betrayed. And, the Republicans are in for, I've even seen the election results in the last week in, like statewide elections and stuff elsewhere, House and Senate elections in state houses, state senates. And it's brutal for the Republicans.
It is
just brutal. So everything's changed, and his credibility is, in my view, in the toilet. You don't know from one day to the next whether what he says is true, and I think it's healthy that people realize that now.
So are you surprised that Joe Kent, of course, he resigned as director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Are you surprised at all? I imagine not, that the CIA is now going after him.
It's called the Schmierbund. Boy, they go after you big time. You get off the reservation, you challenge the deep state, and they come at you with everything. And he seems to have handled it pretty well, but I don't think they're done with him. All of a sudden it's, allegations of, he's leaking information, and he listens to the allegations and he calmly says, yeah, right, it didn't happen. So I think he's handling it very well. And when he resigned, I sent him a note of congratulations, that he had done so. I regret that Tulsi Gabbard, who I liked for a very long time, hasn't done the same thing. I know sometimes these people get in the situations and they think, well, maybe I can be a brake on madness. Maybe I can have an impact from inside. And so, they don't want to do what Kent did. But I think what Kent did has more impact than staying inside and to control the runaway beast. I mean, we've already learned in this Iran fiasco, we've already learned that Trump wasn't getting his information from his own staff, from his intelligence people. He wasn't getting his information from his military. He was getting his information from people like Jared Kushner. And he admitted it. Well, Jared said this, and Witkoff said that, and Marco said this, and so those were the sources of his decision making. And as far as Tulsi Gabbard and her estimates of the nuclear threat from Iran, he said something to the effect, "I don't give a blankety blank what she says," which isn't really a good idea to frame it that way. But he's not one to be careful of another person's feelings or the perception of the country if you cannot give a blankety blank about what your director of national intelligence says.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book, Empire of Lies, Fragments from the Memory Hole, again, Charles Goyette, you mentioned the JFK assassination in your book, and that's kind of a point of interest for many people. And, supposedly we were going to get all the files from JFK. We have received some. Who do you think, though, was responsible for JFK's death?
Well, I can't tell you that I know. I follow it reasonably closely for a layman, and there are a lot of people that belong in the police lineup. I mean, certainly the CIA and Alan Dulles and James Jesus Angleton belong in the lineup. There were other CIA operatives that belong in the lineup. Certainly the mob belongs in the lineup. I mean, it was hysterical if you're detached from it and you don't understand that it's a matter of life and death. But when Jack Ruby came out and said the reason he shot Oswald is that he didn't want President Kennedy's widow, Jackie, to have to sit through a trial. It's absurd. This mobster associate said that. It's absurd. But the mob and the CIA had been in bed together for a very long time. The mob was in bed with the government deeply during World War II. They were given control of the docks in the New York, New Jersey area. So that relationship goes way, way back, and nobody can deny it. So those are a couple of the suspects. Certainly, Angleton's relationship. He was basically a mole for Israel. That's why they have a statue or a plaque in his remembrance in Israel, because he was operating inside the CIA on their behalf. So they deserve to be in the lineup as well in some form. Everybody knows now that Kennedy was desperately trying to prevent Israel from getting nukes with material that they had stolen from the United States. And so he was taken out for all of these reasons. I think it's some weird harmonic convergence, that all these interests came together. The mob wanted him out because they wanted their casinos in Cuba again, and the deep state certainly wanted him out because he was standing down on things like the Vietnam War and the Cold War and trying to denuclearize international conflicts, and so they wanted him out. I mean, the spectrum of people that seem to have come together in this weird situation is very long. So I'm happy when somebody comes out with more information. The information that condemns the CIA is widely available. There's been nothing but liars about this story from the very beginning. The mob is clearly implicit in it some way. I wouldn't be surprised if Israel had a hand in it. So there's more to the picture than is commonly discussed. And of course, from your background in reading, that when people started questioning the Warren Commission report, the CIA got a little desperate and floated out the phrase "great marketing work." I mean, it's been very effective. They cultivated and nurtured the phrase "conspiracy theorists,"
Right.
and they put out videos and texts and so on. Don't believe the conspiracy theorists. These people on the commission, were honorable men of the highest standard, and so on and so forth. And so it's been sleight of hand, and they've been deceiving us ever since, as I recount in the book. Bruce, the importance of Kennedy's assassination to me is that I do not pretend to be an expert on it, although I'm a well-informed layman, but I'm not an expert on it. But what I am an expert on is what it did to America. And what it did to America is empower the deep state. The deep state had free run of the globe after World War II. And if somebody looked at the deep state funny, they'd topple their government. And this was true in Central America. This was true. They they assassinated the DMs in Vietnam. They tried to topple de Gaulle. They tried to topple de Gaulle in the colonel's coup in France. They toppled, of course, our troubles. Many of our troubles today stem from the coup that they staged in 1953 in Iran. We're still suffering blowback from that. But until the Kennedy assassination, they had tried to operate beyond the borders of the United States. But with the Kennedy assassination, it became clear, and it's been evident to me ever since, and I think readers of my book will agree, that now their field of operation is not just foreign. It's not just beyond our borders, but it's within the United States too. And so it is a real inflection point in our history. It's the most important inflection point in the last, certainly in the last 100 years.
Yeah. And you just mentioned the deep state. And in your book, Empire of Lies, you call the deep state the executive arm of the Empire of Lies. So for people who may be listening to this for the first time, what or who are the deep state?
So the deep state is it's centered. I like the name. People have called it by many names over the years. They've called it the shadow government and the invisible government, and there have been elements of it. It's never been more powerful than now. I like the name the deep state because it's something. It reveals something of its sinister nature and where it's actually hidden. But it's found primarily concentrated in the intelligence agencies and the top brass at the Pentagon, often all throughout the bureaucracy, as I've suggested, all the way down, people responding to incentives in government to please their bosses, and their bosses may be toadies of the deep state and so on. So it's found, but it's primarily centered in things like the intelligence agencies and the State Department, and maybe in some of the leadership of the House and the Senate that are privy to inside information without telling the American people. So that's where it's centered. But it is the deep state is like a beehive. The empire is the hive. And so all the different bees, they have different functions. Some are worker bees or forager bees, and some fan their wings to keep the queen cool and stuff. They all have different functions, but they all serve a common hive, a common purpose, and they don't sting one another. They sting their opponents, but they're protective of one another. And it's kind of a mental construct because nobody has to give specific orders. Okay, here's the deep state's marching orders for the day. Of course, somebody generates talking points for the media, and they all use them and parrot them like automatons. But the primary direction and the operations of the deep state always serve the global American empire. And the servitors of the deep state know it, and they don't have to be told. It's, as I say, it's like a hive mind, and they know the purpose that they are serving, and it helps them get promoted, creates wealth for many of them. So that's kind of a thumbnail description in my view of the deep state. And it's different. It's different from the establishment. And the establishment are guys like, who's the Treasury Secretary, that former Treasury Secretary that resigned because of his ties to Epstein, and he was on the board of, he was president of Harvard for a while, and then he was, he's had every possible position anybody could want. He was, I think, a director or a economist at the International Monetary Fund. There are so many of these people, and they're centered primarily in academia, and the establishment serves the interests of the deep state, one, hoping to get ahead, get promoted, get noticed, and generate welfare from them, and they serve the global American empire too. But they're two different functions. One's kind of inside, one's kind of outside.
Now, you mentioned the media, which is an interesting point. When I was a kid, I used to watch Walter Cronkite because my parents loved him. And I mentioned this on a previous show. I didn't know if I suspected he was Democrat, but I didn't really know based on his reports if he was a Democrat or a Republican. But today, you can see that it's very transparent. This is a network that supports Democrats. This is a network that supports Republicans. Is this sort of two legs on the same chair? In other words, if there's a deep state, do they kind of serve a function to bring us all to a certain point?
Yeah. And you're right to take a skeptical look at the party divide, because the deep state is empowered by Republicans just as much as it's empowered by the Democrats, and this is where they come together. And you notice just, for example, the most evident example is there are all kinds of wedge issues, and the Democrats and the Republicans can fight about the SAVE Act, for example, and they can fight about a budget item here and there. But when it comes to the war, when it comes to global American empire, they are on the same page, and this has been the case for years. So Cronkite was, moderate leftist, and I didn't have any faith in him during the years of his prime. I remember, just to my own embarrassment, I remember when he started talking about this Soviet writer that was blowing the whistle on the Soviet Union, and his name was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he was trying to find refuge from death sentence. He'd been in the camps and so on, and he was finally exiled from Russia, from the Soviet Union, and came to the West. And Cronkite, for 2 or 3 days in a row, talked about this guy Solzhenitsyn and his account of the horrors of the gulags in the Soviet Union and the KGB and stuff. And I watched this with a gimlet eye, you might say. That I thought, well, if Walter Cronkite is singing this guy's praises, he must not be worth much. But I finally came around and read the books, and I thought it was a really remarkable, amazing account of what the media, the lapdog press in America, hadn't told us. The lapdog press told us that. The New York Times told us there was no starvation during the great Stalin starvation in Russia and the Ukraine famine. They told us that Herbert Matthews of the New York Times told us that Fidel Castro was just an agrarian reformer. There's never been a war that I know of that they haven't been on board and championing. And that's the lapdog press for you.
So our leaders and the deep state, if we want to address that, they are either learning from history or they are not. If we go back to the Roman Empire, we see inflation because every few months or years they would clip off a little bit of their coin and it got smaller and smaller. And today we have inflation, and at some point maybe hyperinflation from all this debt spending due to wars and frivolous, bills and all of that. So do they know they are going to collapse the United States?
Some of them may suspect it, but most of them do not care. It's existential. We have to print the money now, or it's game over for us. They don't want it to be game over. The Fed officials like their private planes and their private chefs, and they like their position of authority, and they like being, feted in public and so on, and they like it. And well, we can't let it be game over, so they keep the fraud going on, and it destroys the country at a slower pace than just admitting that this whole thing is a joke. But with this Iran thing, it's my view, and I think I find it pretty easy to persuade people who care about it. It's my view that this is really a big one. We are entering an era now of unimaginable stagflation. And stagflation is, as you know, and your listeners may want to hear again, is a sort of a portmanteau or a combined set of terms. The stag part of stagflation is a stagnant or a no-growth economy, and deflation is, of course, inflation. And that's what characterized, for example, the 1970s. That was the stagflation decade. And we had double-digit inflation. We had interest rates that soared to the moon. In that period, we had the Fed like it was suffering some strange tropical malaria, jockeying back and forth between raising rates, lowering rates over and over and over again. They changed rates like 30 times in a year. They didn't know what to do, and they were trying to control inflation, but at the same time, they didn't want to shut down the domestic economy, and they wanted people to be able to borrow. It was a terrible time. Gold shot to the moon, of course. Tragic time for people invested in the stock market. But we're going into a period like that now. Just recently, Washington revised the growth numbers. So this is the stagnant part. The growth numbers for the U.S. economy in the last quarter of last year, cut it in half. So they'd estimated growth of 1.4%. They had to cut it down to 0.7%. The growth in half. Growth is stalling out. It's clear everywhere you look. As far as inflation, the producer price index numbers came out the other day just for the month of February. For the month of February, the price, the wholesale price index was up, I think it was 0.7%. So if you annualize that, that's inflation over 8%. That's the inflation part of stagflation. But you ain't seen nothing yet, because that was before those numbers encapsulated the month of February through the 28th, but the war didn't start till the 28th, and oil prices didn't skyrocket until the day after. So now we're seeing this thing of, sky-high oil prices. It affects everything. First, it's energy, and then it's food. And everybody knows now, I hope, that, that this impacts, like fertilizers that we need, that the farmers need. They're in, a planting season or late into a season when they need to fertilize their crops, and the prices are going to go through the roof all over the world. How about the heavy equipment that they use to harvest their crops, to work their fields, and so on? Well, price of diesel's up 44% when I looked the other day. So this but it's even worse than that. And I think some people think, well, if Trump negotiates a deal and the Strait of Hormuz opens again and the ships start flowing, then everything will be great. And, we'll have a recovery and gas will be back down $2. And so it's not going to happen.
Right.
We have destroyed more infrastructure. The war has destroyed more infrastructure, not just us, but all the participants. And that means oil recovery from the ground infrastructure. It means refining infrastructure. It means storage infrastructure. It means transportation infrastructure. It's going to have a huge and long-lasting impact. It's not an area of expertise for me, but I read an article the other day about what it does to helium that comes from the Middle East. Helium is absolutely necessary in the production of chips. Computer chips.
Mhm.
So all of these supply chains have been disrupted. And Bruce, if you'll indulge me, I'll give you just one example of what happens when these guys do that. And I followed this one fairly closely in the first Trump term when he started, tossing tariffs about without any cognition that all of these tariffs have impacts that are unforeseen. And conservatives used to be very good at talking about unforeseen consequences, second order, third order effects. They don't do it anymore. So when Trump put his tariffs on China, it's if you go to a Chinese restaurant, you notice there's a lot of pork on the menu. The Chinese people in China eat a lot of pork, and as a consequence, they need feed for the pork, and they had been purchasing for a long time, massive amount of soybeans from American farmers. But that came to an end with Trump's tariff policy. So it's just like the supply chains in the oil and fertilizer that came to an end with the tariff policy. So the rest of the world's looking at this, and they're not dumb. They wanted that market share that Americans had given up for their farmers. And in South America, places like Brazil began clearing land and planting soybeans and creating transportation infrastructure and ports and stuff to move it to China. And China was perfectly happy to buy soybeans from Brazil, which now was producing at costs lower than the American farmers were producing. So we provided an open door for competitors to American farmers to grab market share. And the pain was so great. The pain was so great for the American farmers. This is the way these things seem to work. The pain was so great for the American farmers that after hearing from them and facing election consequences because of their anger, the administration said, well, we've got to do something for the farmers that they had just injured needlessly and taken their market share away. So they said, well, we'll come up with a bailout bill. So they came up with billions of dollars to bail out the farmers that they had inconvenienced and impoverished in many ways by that tariff bill. So it cost the American people even more money with the bailout bill. The deficit goes up, the debt goes up, and in the meantime, the American, and even in dropping the tariffs or dropping them in part, the American soybean farmers have never recovered their market and have never recovered their prices. So, and this is, I say this, and people that what does soybeans have to do with oil and fertilizer and helium and so on? Well, supply chains take years to build and they can be very delicate. And if you think you can interrupt or destroy a supply chain and then flip a switch and it comes back online tomorrow, you are sadly mistaken. It doesn't work that way. There are secondary and tertiary effects of doing those sorts of things.
So, talking about the experiment called Liberty, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Could somebody like a Thomas Massey, become president and things could change? What's your view at this point of should we buy a bunker or should we still remain active in the society that we see failing in front of us?
Yeah, it's a tough question because, I'll send Thomas Massey money and I'll cheer him on and I'll write about him and, hope for the very best. Um, It doesn't satisfy anybody for me to say this, but I think that we're in a long-term trajectory down, and loss of liberty is as one of the consequences of it, and it too can't be switched like a light. And it's like freedom is entrusted to the people that are enjoying it. So if we think that our founders can create a system of freedom, that has checks and balances and divides power and divides government to keep us safe from unwieldy, unwelcome authoritarianism in our life. If they think that that clock can be set in motion and they don't have to pay attention to it, then it's game over, because it will run down, and it is running down. And what we can do about it, the best solution I can give is it depends on massive decentralization. Decentralization of everything, decentralization of the monetary system, banking, education, even our churches and religions and deepest cultural views, all of our I mentioned education. I mean, massive decentralization of government and government authority, localization of the things that matter most. The county was the original form of government in America. It's because you could make a change. The sheriff was a big deal. Power lodged with local authorities and with local government and local people's decisions. And only, step by step, the camel got its nose into the tent. And now all authority, everybody realizes that the game for America's future, and whether your kids live or die, and how prosperous you will be or how impoverished you will be, is played out in Washington and not in local government. And so it seems to me that you have to come to this conclusion that it is our freedom is not to be recovered until we're massively decentralized and have to sort of reorganize on our own. And the example that I think in our current circumstances is the very best one is the power to go to war, since we're in a war, and I'm consumed with the frauds and the lies that American people have been told to get us into phony regime change wars. They're massive lies, massive frauds that I detail in the book. But the founders were unlike Bruce today's leaders. They were really well read in the precedents. They knew what they were doing when they created the Constitution and this system of government. They actually were very learned people. We were so lucky. Historians elsewhere in the world knew those Americans, for some reason, they had a generation of people that were just uncommonly. Paul Johnson, the British historian, said, comparing, the top tier of America's leadership to the British leadership at the time, there was no question. Everybody knew the American, the people behind the American Revolution, remaking America, the Ben Franklins and the Jeffersons, the Madisons, the Monroes, and the people in Parliament and kings, couldn't hold a candle to their brilliance and their learning. So one of the things they did when they decided that freedom, was dependent in part about dividing government power so it couldn't grow out of control, was they didn't just give, you can have this power, some power to them, some to him, some to you. They didn't just divide it up willy-nilly. They knew the precedents. And so when they created the power for war, they lodged it specifically in the hands of the legislature. And I think Madison even wrote about it in some detail. He said, look, the executive branches throughout government, the executive, by that I mean kings, dukes, princes, prime ministers, the executive throughout history has a propensity to engage in needless wars, in elective wars. They can ruin nations and so on, but they seem that the elective wars flow from the executive branch. So in America, we will not lodge war-making authority with the president in the executive branch, and we will give it specifically we will give it to the people through their representatives, and their representatives will have to decide these issues by declaring war. And so it was a great precedent. It's only honored in the breach, and we see this breach today because a declaration of war does exactly what we haven't done since World War II. Those declarations of war used to specify who is the enemy, why, what resources are we prepared to donate to defeat the enemy. I mean, when the signers of the Declaration of Independence pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to this enterprise. Those were the resources they were willing to donate to that, effectively a declaration of war. So, and how will you know when it ends? What is the end game? What does victory consist of? That's why you have a debate about a declaration of war by the representatives of the people. And then when they come back to their neighborhood for reelection, they can be shamed by their poor judgment, or they can be lauded for their good judgment when the facts are in. But instead, we have allowed the executive branch to take all of that war-making authority. We've had nothing but continuous wars since World War II. The last declaration of war was World War II. And somebody might note, by the way, that a succession of abject failures in these wars. I don't need to detail them. We could start at Vietnam and go to Korea. We could go through Iraq, and I'm not going to detail them. But I think everybody kind of knows. And Iran is on the way to being much the same thing. But who has seen the debate about this? How do you know when the game's over? When the president says it's over? How do you know?
Right.
Yeah. So if the people have been given a good rule book, a workable rule book that is designed to protect their liberties and to create an opportunity for people to be prosperous and free, and they don't care for it, and they honor it in the breach, and the politicians go to conventions and fundraising dinners and so on, and they talk about the Constitution and I swear an oath and so on and so forth, and don't care about it, and we don't hold their feet to the fire, then the trajectory just continues to spiral down, 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 down.
Mhm.
My view.
Our founding fathers warned us no foreign entanglements, and Charles Goyette is carrying that on in his book, Empire of Lies. And I recommend this book. Last question. Your website is charlesgoyette.com. That's Goyette, charlesgoyette.com. What can people find there?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning it. I have posted on there articles I've written in the last 3 or 4 months about this war and some of the deceit that we're getting, or some of the cronyism that's being exposed in the war. I mean, look, even the Trump kids are buying military drone companies now. I mean, it seems a little bit shameful. There's a story, in fact, a widespread story this week about all the people that, by some circumstance, by hook or by crook, managed to take long leveraged positions in oil 15 minutes before oil exploded on Trump's words. So you can find a little bit about what I've written about there. A link to buy the book, of course, is on there. A bio about me is on there. Those are some of the main things. Some of these interviews that get posted on my site. It's charlesgoyette.com. I have another one called empireoflies.com. They replicate one another pretty much. So, but thank you for mentioning that, Bruce.
Yes, charlesgoyette.com, empireoflies.com. Let me show the book one more time. And Charles Goyette, thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been a real honor. I hope I can have you back sometime.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it, Bruce, and thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us this week. Really appreciate it. If you would, please like this video and subscribe to the Bruce Collins Show channel. That helps us a lot with the algorithm, so we can spread this show over many eyeballs. Also, I have another channel if you're interested. It's Bruce Collins Reacts and Stuff, where I look at some of the mysterious, interesting videos out on YouTube and I react to them. I think you'll like that too. In the meantime, we'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. Take care.
Flip on the switch, feel the static clear, naming the glow, yeah, the reason we're here. From the edge of the map to your kitchen chair, he's talking wild truth like he owns the air. Out past the highway, out past the mall, where the sand keeps secrets, you can hear that call. It's the Bruce Collins Show. Take
That's a wrap, falafelites. This has been a Bad Yodeler production. Good night.